In this video, you will hear from Dr. Joseph Volpicelli, leading naltrexone expert researcher and physician. So this next question I have for you is a really common one, and it's around the question of daily naltrexone versus targeted naltrexone following the Sinclair Method protocol. Generally speaking, everyone's different, but generally speaking, who should be taking naltrexone daily versus who should be doing targeted naltrexone following the Sinclair Method protocol?
Yeah, so I can give you a short answer, but if we really want to get into it, we should have a whole session on this. But let me give you sort of the overview. So the targeted approach is really great for people who we don't have to worry about, tolerance to the sedative effects of alcohol. So who's a good candidate for that? So someone who says that they are a binge drinker. Maybe they just drink a lot on weekends. Uh, the targeted approach is a great idea for folks like that. Someone who's already completed an alcohol detoxification, so they're no longer have tolerance to the sedative effects of alcohol or withdrawal to the sedative effects of alcohol would be a good candidate. Someone maybe who's very early in their addiction. So good candidates are like college students, for example, that they drink too much and they're beginning to lose control over their drinking, but they haven't reached a point where they're drinking a large amount of alcohol daily. They haven't developed tolerance or withdrawal to the alcohol. That would be a good candidate. And to be honest, I think there's a fair percent of people who barely or maybe not quite even meet the criteria for having an alcohol use disorder, but the relationship with alcohol is already is beginning to become problematic. And you know that if you do things like you intend to keep yourself to one or two drinks, you go to a party, and consistently you find out it winds up being three or four where you say, I don't want to drink this weekend. I want to have a weekend free of drinking, and you'll wind up drinking anyway. A situation where you feel like you're losing control over your drinking. And again, even though you haven't had a DUI, even though you don't have tolerance and withdrawal, even though you're not even drinking more than many of your friends, that doesn't mean that your relationship with alcohol is a healthy one. Targeted naltrexone would be a great choice there. Um, and that can help prevent you. So we're using sort of preventative medicine techniques to help prevent you from going on to develop an AUD. In medicine, we have disorders where we call it, say, precancerous lesions, where it looks suspicious, but it's not cancer yet. So we might take steps now to help prevent it from becoming cancerous. Or pre-diabetes, where you don't have the full-blown diabetes yet, but there are signs that the way your body reacts to glucose is dysfunctional and could turn into full diabetes. So you take steps early on to prevent the disorder. And I think that's the same for alcohol use disorder, that there's certain things we can look at and identify at a very early stage. And if your relationship is not healthy, you might want to use naltrexone in a targeted way to prevent it from becoming a disorder, becoming AUD. So those are some of the really good reasons why the Sinclair method or targeted naltrexone would be helpful. And I think there's a large percent of people who would really love the idea of using naltrexone in this way. There's one other group that I want to point out, and this is actually based on some research that we did with people who have a strong family history for alcohol use disorder. So they were college students, and we picked people who uh, we didn't even care what their drinking history was. We made sure we didn't have anyone who met the criteria for alcohol use disorder, but some people were heavy drinkers, some people were pretty moderate drinkers or even light drinkers. But one group of folks had a strong family history for alcohol use disorder, and another group did not. And we gave both groups of individuals the equivalent of about 3 drinks. And we looked at their response to the alcohol. and the people who did not have a family history for alcohol use disorder after 3 drinks, um, they mostly reported that they were feeling more tired after 3 drinks. And we asked them, do you want to have the fourth drink? What was your craving? And they said, no, we're not really interested in having the fourth drink. We're done. The people who had the family history, they first reported an increase in energy after 3 drinks and an increase in craving. So they wanted to have the fourth drink more than they wanted to have the first drink. They wanted to keep going. And again, this was independent of their drinking history. The neat thing is, when we did the experiment again, but this time we gave them naltrexone before drinking, we found that the group that did not have the strong family history, they looked exactly the same. After 3 drinks, they were tired. They had no interest in having the fourth drink. But the people with a strong family history, they look like the people who didn't have a family history. They just got tired after drinking. Their craving didn't increase. So if someone has a strong family history, it might be useful to think about using naltrexone very early on to help prevent you from having problems later in life. And again, targeted naltrexone removes that genetic vulnerability to develop a disorder.
Yeah.
So that's another good reason to use targeted naltrexone or the Sinclair method. Who's
Can
not
I
a good, go ahead.
can
I'm
I
sorry.
quickly interject because I have to ask because I didn't hear my exact drinking style in what you described. I do have the family history. I was a weekend binge drinker, but also a daily kind of bottle of wine plus a night drinker. But I think if I had to choose whether I was a reward or a relief drinker, I drank more for the reward. And I had the same response to naltrexone like you described, where it was almost immediately it just my motivation was just kind of fading down. I wasn't chasing that buzz as much. So, have you seen it work for my kind of drinking style? I was just curious to hear
Yeah,
your thoughts
so
on that.
you might have been blessed by having both.
Okay. Okay.
So the naltrexone, I would strongly recommend the naltrexone would be useful for you, and probably adding some other strategies for deal with the stress
Yeah.
that having using alcohol as a way of dealing with stress, which just
Okay.
sounds like exactly what you did and led to this great result.
Yeah. Okay. Just had to clarify that because, yeah, I know some others who've had more of like a daily habitual drinking and targeted naltrexone did work, but maybe there's, caveats to their drinking style like mine.
Yeah, so again, if you have a strong family history, there's a really high probability you're going to be sensitive to using naltrexone. That was one of the things that we found, that that's a good predictor of someone who's going to respond to naltrexone. In other research that we've done, we actually looked at the genes to see if we could predict who's going to be a good responder to naltrexone. And there's some literature that suggests that a certain kind of genetic pattern predicts who's going to be a good responder to naltrexone versus the people who, if they don't have that genetic pattern, they're not going to do better on naltrexone compared to placebo. So eventually, when we may be able to target exactly those folks who are going to be good responders to naltrexone based on their genes. Right
Well,
now, what we have is, if we don't know what the genotype is, at least we can know the phenotype. We can know how the person responds to alcohol. And the general notion is, if you respond by being energetic, feeling euphoric, it strongly suggests that you're getting the dopamine system going. And the way alcohol gets the dopamine system going is through the release of endogenous opioids. And we can block that effect with naltrexone.
okay, that's very clear. I was definitely one of those drinkers where I almost always felt more excited and happy and giddy when I started drinking. So interesting.
Yeah. Then you ask, who's not a good Sinclair candidate? And so it's all the opposite of those things. So someone who um, doesn't feel energetic when they drink. They can control how much they drink. They can, early on in their drinking history, they can keep it to 1 or 2 drinks and stop. Over time, the drinking begins to escalate. That if initially they felt calmer when they had 1 or 2 drinks, now it takes more like 3 or 4. On days where they don't drink, they feel not right. Maybe they feel a little bit more anxious. So the anxiety that was helped when they did drink comes back even stronger on days where they don't drink. So now they're beginning to need the alcohol, not just to take away the anxiety that they initially had, but now they have anxiety at baseline and anxiety brought on by the withdrawal from the alcohol. So our anxiety keeps getting worse. And that's why I say to people, use alcohol as a way of coping with anxiety. It's a really bad strategy. It's like borrowing money from the bank. That you borrow the money, you pay the bill, but now you have to pay the bank back with interest. So it's not a way of dealing with your anxiety, not in the long term. And so for someone like this, it's important to address the underlying issue, which is the anxiety. And naltrexone may not be especially helpful for those folks. Having said this, we don't know for sure if you're going to be a naltrexone responder or not. These are generalizations. So sometimes you just try it. And so if you want to try the Sinclair method, as we said before, naltrexone and alcohol don't have any terrible effects if you combine the two. And if it helps you, great. But don't be horribly disappointed if you're not getting a good effect. If you're that sedative type drinker, if you're drinking to avoid withdrawal or take away withdrawal, or using alcohol as a way of coping with stress or putting you to sleep. You keep in mind that there's other approaches that we can take that will be helpful for you.
Did you want to speak really briefly just to, I know there's so much you could say here, but like with that question, the daily naltrexone, like who benefits from taking naltrexone daily versus the Sinclair method? And I realize
Yeah,
we could talk about that for an hour, but just
sure.
briefly.
Well, let me tell you the rationale why in the first studies that we did, we used daily naltrexone as opposed to targeted naltrexone. So keep in mind when we first used naltrexone, I set up a protocol where I detoxified everyone first. So everybody was started with at least 3 days of no drinking, and they were not in withdrawal. So that was everybody was starting at that point. So theoretically, we could have used the Sinclair method, targeted naltrexone, or the daily naltrexone. They were prepared that they could have done either way. I wish there was, but I do not know of any data that directly compared those two approaches and said one's better than the other. Now, this is where we have a big discussion over looking at the literature and that sort of thing, and I'd be happy to do that. But I don't know of any really good, well-controlled studies that really compared the two. But the reason why I went with daily naltrexone was the folks that I treated at the VA hospital were pretty severe drinkers, and they were drinking daily anyway. So if I use targeted naltrexone, they'd be using the naltrexone every day. So I wanted to make sure that they didn't think about if they had to use the naltrexone before drinking. So I just said, take the naltrexone in the morning every day to help ensure that they would be adherent with taking the naltrexone. Because if you wait, if you give people the option of just taking it when they're going to go drinking, and keep in mind the folks that I was treating then were drinking every day anyway, then they would have to make the decision, do I want the naltrexone or not? Some of them would decide they don't want the naltrexone because they still want to get that high. Now you might say, well, what's the difference of deciding to take it in the morning or deciding to take it in the afternoon when they normally drink? And I'll tell you my logic of why I take it in the morning. It turns out that when people make decisions about their behavior, there's sort of two conflicting systems in our brain. We have a logical brain, a cognitive brain, which looks logically what's in our best interest, what's in our long-term best interest, and weighs facts. It weighs probabilities. It makes smart decisions. And that has some input into the actual behaviors that we make. But we also have an emotional part of our brain, or the limbic brain, which asks the question, what's going to make me feel good now? Doesn't care about the long-term consequences. I'll deal with those later. But, uh, what's going to make me feel good over the next hour? So if you're asking someone at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, do you want to take the naltrexone or not? The limbic brain would have a stronger influence over the person's behavior than if you ask the person at 8 a.m. if you want to take the naltrexone. So take it at 8 a.m. and then for the majority of people, they'll be covered later in the afternoon when they decide to drink. Now, that's what the original thinking was. For now, for folks like that, I often suggest take one in the morning and throw another one in the afternoon because it's probably not going to hurt. But at least I know they have some coverage in their system from taking it in the morning. And I see this sort of pattern often in working with patients that when they see me on Monday after a weekend of heavy drinking, they say, "Doc, that's it. I'm done. I'm not going to drink anymore. I swear I'm not going to have one drop. This is it. It was a terrible weekend. I had a fight with my spouse and I was hungover. I'm done." And I believe them. And they are honest when they tell me that. And that's because I'm talking to the cognitive brain at that point. On the weekend, the limbic brain says it's okay to drink. And you say, well, where's the cognitive brain? So the cognitive brain often goes through trying to find some rational reason why it's okay to drink. We call that rationalization. So the cognitive brain will say, no, you don't want to go through what you went through last weekend. And the limbic brain says, no, I really want it. So there's a debate. So the limbic brain says, look, I'll tell you what, I'll just have one drink. And cognitive brain says, okay, that's fine. I'll let you have one drink. And then what happens? The one drink creates the cravings. Now the limbic brain has an even stronger vote over your behavior. So if you're asking the person to decide right before they're going to drink, I'm fearful that sometimes they're going to decide not to take the medicine. So you have less good adherence. And that would be really bad. So for some folks who are really sort of on the fence about whether they want to give up the drinking, the extended release naltrexone is even the better option because I only need them one day a month to decide that they don't want to drink or they don't want to drink excessively anymore. And then I can get the shot in their butt and now they're covered for the whole month. And then because they have naltrexone in their system, the limbic brain doesn't even get to have that strong a vote because their craving is less. If they have a slip, the slip doesn't create the need to have the second, third, and fourth drink. So it really biases the behavior in terms of what the cognitive logical brain wants to do. So that's a way of dealing with a limbic brain that sometimes makes decisions which feel good temporarily, but are not in your long-term best interest. So that's why for some people who adherence is an issue, it's better that they take it every single day. And if they're still on the fence, even on top of that, to get the extended release naltrexone, where I only have to have them once a month come in and get the shot. So that's some of the plus minus associated with extended release, daily use, or targeted use.
Very helpful. And even just like on top of that, you describing kind of the two brains that are kind of battling with one another, because I feel like when we're in the midst of alcohol use disorder, we almost feel crazy because on one hand, like you said, Monday morning, we're done. We're serious. We're not drinking again. But then Friday rolls around or even Monday night rolls around and we're like, well, okay, maybe one drink won't hurt. And for a lot of us, we just feel so shameful about that. And we feel out of integrity with ourselves because one part of our brain really does want this change, but the other part, that impulsive part, like needs to drink right now. And so I remember for me, just understanding that that was happening was very empowering. I was like, I'm not crazy. I'm not like, trying to destroy myself here. It really is just like a function of what the heck is happening in my brain. So I appreciate you touching on that. And maybe we can dive into that a bit further in another video.
Yeah, that'll be another good video because a lot of people feel shamed or guilty about their drinking and they don't understand how this mechanism works. And there's nothing different about people who have AUD with respect to this mechanism. Um, yesterday, all the way back to yesterday, um, it was Fat Tuesday. So I gave myself permission to have donuts. My logical brain said, you're really not supposed to eat so many carbs because you need to lose weight. But my limbic brain says, oh, Fat Tuesday, this is going to be my opportunity where I can do it without feeling guilty. So I ate donuts. Then I went and had a big giant Philly soft pretzel. I really went to town. And so now I'm trying to get back on track. But the point is that we always are making these decisions that we have inputs from one part of our brain, which is logical, which is looking for our long-term best interest. And we have another part of the input from the emotional brain, which is saying, what's going to make me feel good now? What's going to take away my pain now? And our ultimate behavior is a function of how those two parts of the brain interact. It has nothing to do with really willpower, has nothing to do with a bad person, has nothing to be shameful about, that all of us have that dilemma going on. And to help teach people strategies for dealing with that dilemma is a large part of that kind of psychosocial support that we can give people to help them progress in their treatment. And I have to say that in general, social supports are really critically important for people in their recovery. I mean, that's one of the things that I think AA gets right. That when people are have peer support or a coach or someone can help hold them accountable, but give them support when they begin to lose hope, that's very important, critically important in terms of people getting better from this disorder. And so I recommend, from the beginning, we've recommended that if people go on naltrexone using the Sinclair method or daily naltrexone, or if they get a monthly injection of extended release naltrexone, that in addition to using the medicine faithfully, it's also important to have psychosocial support to help you get through the process.